Hi folks, it's Thinking Slow here. So I wanted to do a quick video about the outcome from this World Health Assembly that's just finished. I'm not going to go through all of it because it's a bit technical, but the basic question is, did Botswana just save the world from medical tyranny? And a lot of what went on there is quite surprising, and of course there's hardly any coverage in mainstream media of something that's potentially very, very significant. So let's have a look at that. And again, also thanks for those who have signed up to Patreon. That's very much appreciated. And if you want to continue getting this important news and activities to stop this global Great Reset, then please think about signing up on Patreon, and where there is Thinking Slow. Thanks. So what's a bit confusing, at least for me, was that we're talking about two really separate things. I mean, they're sort of related, but they're separate tracks of activity that are going on at the moment. And, we're talking quite a lot about the second one, which is this new pandemic preparedness treaty. And nobody knows now whether it's going to be a treaty, some kind of other agreement, but it's going to be a document, a new document. And it's a bit confusing because at the same time as this is going on, the US have just gone in and made some sort of slightly left of field suggested amendments to the existing international health regulations. And that's a separate sort of track of activity, and it's not quite sure why they're not. I'm not sure why they're not related or tied together. This seemed to come out of the blue somewhat. So let's have a look at this one first, and then go into the Pandemic Preparedness Treaty. And of course, we've been assured by our government that nothing to see here. It's all years down the road, and sovereignty won't be given away, and nothing to see here. It'll all be fine. I don't believe them for 1 second, to be honest. I think there'll be nothing fine about these, about the new treaty. That the process is due to finish by 2024. But let's look at the first one. So the US, sort of out of the blue, in a very underhand way, put some amendments to the existing international health regulations together in January, and that seemed to sit in a outer space for quite a few months until people started figuring out that the US had submitted these very, very substantial changes to these health regulations that have been around for a long time. The last iteration was 2005, and really there've been many years they work fine, and then all of a sudden the US decides that it's necessary to make some wholesale changes. And as I said, I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is an important one, and this actually highlights the direction of travel of what they're trying to do. In this case, a notification of a public health emergency of international concern was an agreement with the state party involved. And what the American changes is to delete the whole thing about the state party being involved in this declaration of a health emergency. So this is now done by the Director General of the WHO on his sole discretion. And that's a huge transfer of sovereignty from states to the WHO. And that there's other important parts about this. They've also added in that a determination can be made not only from information received from the state itself, but from actually other third parties or public sources. So what they've really done is they've changed this so effectively the WHO Director General can say, we received information from somewhere that, country A has this public health emergency, and he can declare that as a public health emergency, even though the state party hasn't provided the information in the first place. It came from a third party, and the state party doesn't agree with that determination. It's a huge transfer of sovereignty, and basically you're giving a loaded gun to the Director General to declare that in a country that doesn't agree and hasn't provided the information. And also another very typical and a slippery word that these people have inserted is a potential public health emergency. Now, that's an open-ended term that can mean anything. And I think, as we've seen through COVID, these people, they're constantly diluting the terminology of what's an emergency. So I think we've seen how those terms changed, how they changed the terms of the word vaccine, and how they changed the word of the definition of the word pandemic, and how they changed the definition of the word case. And they're constantly diluting the terminology in order to give themselves more power. And, if you're adding in a word like potential, I mean, they could declare a potential emergency any day of the week based on nothing, particularly as in this case, the state party has not provided the information. This has come from a third party, and then their agreement's not required. So this is really providing a loaded gun to the Director General to call an emergency more or less anywhere, anytime, for any reason. It's completely outrageous, to be honest. And what's surprising here, and this is all listed on the website of wireamerica.org, and this guy, James Roguski, has covered this quite well. In fact, he's covered it very well. Probably the only person anywhere to actually describe something so significant as what we've just seen. But what's amazing is it's all of these countries, and then Russia on the next day, they're showing some more of these, are standing up at this committee session and objecting to United States transferring sovereignty across to the Director General and putting in the clauses that we just looked at. And not only that clause, but also a whole new section on auditing. So the WHO essentially has gone from a cooperative body that's really concerned with international health emergencies into a sort of command and control structure where it gets to audit the nation state members. And that's a whole new section. And most of these countries, quite rightly, are standing up and saying, listen, we're not signing up to this. Sovereignty is sovereignty. We're not giving the WHO the right to unilaterally call an emergency based on information that we don't agree with, and we're not giving them these sort of unlimited auditing rights. And it just, to me, it's amazing that the US is pushing this, and it's these countries standing up saying, no, we don't accept that. And also, I think within the US, the states have, or some of the states have woken up to what the federal government is doing. And they're also spitting blood about this huge transfer of sovereignty, or attempted transfer of sovereignty. So the net upshot of this is it never happened. It was binned. And instead of the amendment that we just looked at, there was another fairly irrelevant amendment was sort of quickly replacing that amendment, and the irrelevant one was to do with about timings of decisions coming into effect. It's not 100% irrelevant, but it's basically nothing as significant as what the US was proposing. None of those, all of those terms, all of those changes would drop basically, and they then agreed this sort of amended amendment, if you see what I mean, just about the new timings. So they congratulated themselves about making an amendment, but it was nothing to do with the initial proposals from the US in January. And as I said, the amazing thing was to seeing the list of countries standing up saying we don't agree to this. It's sort of, the world has gone upside down really, where countries you wouldn't expect are standing up for sovereignty, and that America is trying to hand it away. Very bizarre, to be honest, and not reported anywhere properly in the mainstream media. So let's look also at this parallel track, which is the Pandemic Preparedness Treaty, or whatever final document comes out from that, because that's a parallel process. One part of the process is the usual stitch up of these dishonest politicians. The WHO is giving a lot of weight to something called the Independent Panel, and it's a panel of sort of ex-politicians, stuffed full of these globalists, and a lot of these people are ex-UN bureaucrats, none of them with any identifiable, discernible knowledge of epidemiology. And they essentially, in their initial report, which we look at in more detail somewhere else, they're looking to institutionalize all the things that went wrong in the pandemic. So a huge emphasis on vaccines. Very little is said about antivirals, and they're going to talk a bit more about this equity, which is essentially global communism, because a lot of these people are also far left leaning. So this is very much a redistribution policy and trying to create global equality using this word equity. Now, nobody in a way is too upset by global equality, but in this case it makes zero sense, and I'll show you why that is. It's just a way of transferring tens or hundreds potentially of billions from us to somewhere else for no good reason, and I'll show you why it's no good reason. They also praise the speed of vaccine development, although very many senior medical people have expressed extraordinary concern, including on this channel, about skipping through a proper long vaccine approval process. This has all been fast-tracked, and they see that as a benefit rather than something to be worried about. They're also transferring complete autonomy to the WHO because they don't want to make a lot of the funding, they don't want to make tied, and they don't want to make it voluntary. They want to basically have the WHO receive its funding, and that's it. There's no restrictions to any of that. So it has total autonomy. So again, the member states lose any kind of negotiating position. You just give the money in. You don't have any conditionality. And they're talking again about the precautionary principle, and I'll show you why for these people on hundreds of thousands of dollars on government salaries, maybe it's no problem for them to exercise a precautionary principle of closing everyone's life down because it doesn't affect them in any way, or it has a limited effect on them, whilst people running small businesses get wiped out. So totally asymmetric understanding of sort of risk and consequences. And that they don't seem to have any problem with this sort of moving to a sort of command and control. We tell you what to do, and then we audit you to see if you've done it. So here is one of the guys on this independent, I use the word, panel. He's a former Foreign Secretary for the UK, a guy called David Miliband. This is not the best photo of him, but it's the one I chose to use. He's on $1 million a year total package running a charity, and guess who funds the charity? Yep, mainly funded by taxpayers, including a large chunk of money. This is in thousands of dollars. So this total is $76 million worth of funding. That's a lot of funding from, you guessed it, from the UN. So, what's not to like? This is a huge gravy train. Of course, this independent panel is going to want more spending by the WHO, and more spending by the WHO, and WHO is the United Nations agency, and they're getting $12 million in here, which is part of their hundreds of millions of spending, which is part of his $1 million total package. So also someone with zero knowledge of epidemiology or pandemic responses, but he's part of the great and the good on this independent panel. Very many of the others are also very similar background, ex-politician, no knowledge of the subject matter, but making all of these recommendations. Now, the reason I said that this concept of equity, which is sort of global socialism, is completely pointless in this case, is the work of Professor Fenton and others has shown that the lowest death rates per 100,000 of population, actually this is per million, are also associated with the lowest vaccination levels, and this is in Africa. So this globalist obsession with equity makes zero sense. What are you going to do? You're going to move the people with the low vaccination and the low death rates. Either you're going to move them into high vaccination and low death rates, or high vaccination and then move them up here at the same time. I mean, is that really what equity is all about? But these are political sort of socialist ideas with really no basis in science. They don't stand up to any kind of rational analysis. Just from this chart alone, you can tell it makes no sense at all. But they're going to carry on with this, and also we're talking I think, as I said somewhere else, it's about $150 billion is going to be spent on vaccines and boosters through to 2025. So we're talking jaw-dropping amounts of money, and it's really not clear what sort of equity, health equity, you're really achieving here. I think essentially you're achieving not that much for jaw-dropping amounts of money. But as I said, they're all in this network of NGOs and taxpayer-funded charities and ex-UN and ex-WHO. So this is one happy family that's always going to want more government spending, and they're going to call it equity, although it's just pointless redistribution of money, which they, of course, channel where they want to. And I've said it's global communism, and I believe that's true, because it's equality of output regardless of input. So everybody has to be the same, regardless of history, strength of domestic healthcare, population structure, population age, domestic priorities, anything else. It's all. Communism has to be equality of output, equality of results and outputs, regardless of anything. There can't be any differentiation according to anything. It's all got to be a completely uniform grey. It's got to come out the other end. So just wrapping up then, I want to get an expert to talk through some of these things. And we've got an outstanding request for an interview from a very important individual who can talk a little bit more about this, who's sort of fighting on the front line with the WHO and the World Health Assembly. But the next set of things to look out for is the June consultations. I personally don't believe the consultations are going to make that much difference. This is about the new pandemic preparedness treaty. It's clear the big wigs have decided that they're going to go ahead and do this. So you're on the back foot trying to stop it through a public consultation. I think the public consultation program was a stitch up as well, and I want to get this person to talk about that. And then this will eventually come out at the end of 2024. Of course, a lot can happen between now and then, but I think the next date to look at is June 2020. Hopefully we can get this person on the channel and explain if there's anything useful we can do to stop this as much as possible. And lastly, there was the question in Parliament about the transfer of sovereignty, and Sajid Javid, a person who we don't trust at all, said that nothing to see move along. But actually, already in his answer, he's talking about this equity again, and talking about vaccines again. It's the obsession with vaccines. But this equitable access to vaccines is part of this gigantic funding operation, with tens of billions being sent up to ACTA and Gavi and then redistributed around the world. So in a way, the answer is already dishonest, because that is a commitment, and that, the answer saying we're not going to make any commitments, but within the answer is already a clue that there will be commitments, and this will sort of impinge on UK decisions on how to spend UK tax dollars or tax pounds. So I don't trust this guy at all. I think they've decided politically they want to go ahead with this new treaty. Again, the whole process makes no sense at all, because you've already got the international health regulations that have been around for donkey's years. Which cover exactly how to respond to a pandemic. So there's no reason at all, no earthly reason why you'd want a new document. It's just a huge bureaucratic process. I don't really know what the advantages of that. And, not only will it impinge on national sovereignty and how to spend your tax revenue, but I'm sure they will also try and stuff all kinds of transfers of sovereignty up to the WHO in Geneva. And as you saw at the beginning, that's what the US tried to do in January of this year, and it didn't work because of the opposition of countries like Botswana. And I'm also sure that when the US put that proposal in January, they didn't just do that out of the blue. I'm sure, the undemocratic EU and the undemocratic UK had seen drafts of that, and they knew what was coming, and they were on board with it. So I don't doubt for an intention. The second is to transfer sovereignty as well as sign up for this sort of global communism here. So I don't, this answer doesn't do anything for me, but we're going to keep on top of this and keep reporting back to you, and hopefully get someone who's very knowledgeable to explain what happened in the last round of public consultation and what to get ready for in June. Okay, hope you found this interesting. Thank you very much. Bye. Stay free, don't stay safe.